Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on in the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. This week, South Korea and the United States celebrated the 70th anniversary of their alliance with President Yoon Suk Yeol's state visit to Washington D.C. But his trip to D.C. was more than just a celebration of 70 years of relations. President Yoon Suk Yeol and his American counterpart Joe Biden refreshed their alliance and security commitments through their so-called Washington Declaration. Under the latest statement, the two sides will launch a nuclear consultative body that will focus on nuclear and strategic planning issues. The two leaders' fresh dedication includes tightening their economic security, which not only feeds their national economies but also sets a favorable environment for a dynamic foreign investment from both sides. Presidents Yoon and Biden further agreed to get the ball rolling on discussions about expanding their alliance in cyberspace and outer space. That is, both pursuing ambitions in space and countering space threats and cyber attacks from North Korea. President Yoon Suk Yeol rounded out his almost week-long state visit to the U.S. with a speech at Harvard University in Boston. Let's first turn to our Oh Soo-young, who traveled with the president all this week.
Finding the trail of freedom in the city of Boston. President Yoon Suk Yeol on Friday called for a global awakening to protect fairness and rule of law in a world of rampant geopolitical and economic challenges. Delivering a lecture at Harvard Kennedy School, the South Korean leader warned that freedom is increasingly under threat from autocracies and misinformation, leveraging the growing power of digital technology.
민주주의는 상식과 진실, 그리고 양심으로 대표되는 지성에 기반하는 제도입니다.
Yoon pointed to the spirit of American freedom that inspired the founding fathers at Harvard, as well as the Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and laissez-faire market principle. Respect for freedom, he said, inspired the demand for the social system of fairness and a prosperous economy.
자유에는 책임이 따른다고 할 때 바로 그 책임은 자유가 공존하기 위한 조건인 공정에서 나오는 것입니다. 그리고 법의 지배는 자유의 공존의 조건인 공정을 구현하는 것입니다.
With American freedom having extended over the Pacific to liberate other countries, Yoon noted that he'd stopped by Harvard Memorial Church to honor 18 Harvard students who had sacrificed their lives fighting for South Korea in the 1950 to 53 Korean War. As South Korea now takes on a greater role in global governance, Yoon called for solidarity to defend freedom across the world, rebuking North Korea's human rights violations and condemning the invasion of Ukraine.
Freedom is indivisible, and when one man is enslaved, all men are not free.
Yoon's lecture comes after a summit with President Biden on Wednesday, where they set out ways to broaden their 70-year military ties to a comprehensive alliance that addresses various global challenges. A landmark of independence history, Boston represents the two allies' shared universal values of liberal democracy, then sets the scene for the future of their strategic cooperation as a bustling innovation hub of cutting-edge technologies, which is critical for the future of economic security. Amid his push to create a biohealth innovation ecosystem in South Korea, Yoon on Friday attended a cluster roundtable attended by Boston-based startups and big-name firms such as Boston Dynamics and Moderna, along with clinical and research hospitals and investors that make up the city's tech and medical cluster. While Yoon discussed the role of institutional and regulatory support for innovators looking to fast-track commercialization, the president's entourage of Korean and tech medical firms signed a total of 9 MOUs in the biosector with their American counterparts. These include deals between Kakao and Google to cooperate in biotech using AI, and Kai's deal with the Massachusetts General Hospital on cluster cooperation. To learn from the Bostonian model of nurturing talents and innovation, Yoon met with academics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology earlier in the day, including the Dean of the Engineering School, Ananta Chandrakasan, entrepreneurial expert Robert Langer, and synthetic biology professor James Collins. The top office says he consulted the scholars on how digital technology and bioresearch can converge and benefit humanity, stressing the importance of AI in the speed of new drug development and gene therapy. Yoon's office says the discussions on innovation policy will be reflected in the government's upcoming Digital Bio Initiative in May. Seeking freedom in the past, present and future of the 70-year alliance in Boston, President Yoon wraps up his US state visit and travels back to South Korea over the weekend. Oh Soo-young, 아리랑뉴스, Boston.
The summit between President Yoon and Biden was undoubtedly the highlight of the President Yoon Suk Yeol state visit to the U.S. The two leaders managed to secure a landmark deal aimed at strengthening extended deterrence against North Korea's evolving threats. For this week's Weekly Focus, we delve deeper into the Washington Declaration with our foreign affairs correspondent, Pae-Eun-ji. Welcome back, Eun-ji.
Good to be here.
So, Eun-ji, let's jump right into the Washington Declaration. Now, that is to defend against and deter North Korea's attacks. Now, what makes this statement so significant or special?
Well, the fact that they've laid out a separate statement on extended deterrence itself is very significant because it's the first time the two countries have done this after holding a summit between their leaders. This clearly shows that both countries are strongly committed to working together to deter nuclear and missile threats. This is what U.S. President Joe Biden said will happen in the event of a nuclear attack by North Korea.
Nuclear threat. Look, a nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies or partisans or partners is unacceptable and will result in the end of whatever regime were to take such an action.
Under the New Deal, the U.S. will take more visible deterrent steps by sending a nuclear-armed submarine to South Korea for the first time in 40 years, along with other strategic assets, including nuclear-capable bombers. The agreement involves the creation of a nuclear consultative group where they will share information on nuclear assets and intelligence and jointly plan responses and exercises.
Right, and now that we're talking about a consultative group, the two allies have already been discussing ways to deter North Korea's attacks, but through extended deterrence strategy and consultation group. Now, walk us through the differences between the two.
Right. Like you just said, Seoul and Washington already have a consultative group called the EDSCG, launched in 2016. The group is made up of vice ministerial level diplomatic and defense officials from both countries. But there were doubts about its effectiveness as consultations were not held regularly. Seoul's presidential office said the new Nuclear Consultative Group, or NCG, will hold consultations 4 times a year, with 2 or 3 to come later this year. In a joint press briefing following the summit, President Yoon also noted it'll be held regularly and that they'll discuss ways to conduct joint operations using both countries' weapons.
북한의 위협에 대응하여 핵과 전략무기 운영 계획에 대한 정보를 공유하고 한국의 첨단 재래식 전력과 미국의 핵전력을 결합한 공동작전을 함께 기획하고 실행하기 위한 방안을 정기적으로 협의할 것이며 그 결과는 양 정상에게 보고될 것입니다.
So there are hopes that the new consultative group will boost credibility and effectiveness, as it means South Korean perspectives and capabilities will likely be factored into the strategic planning from now on.
Right, and it appears that the NCG has been inspired from NATO's consultative group, the NPG.
That's right.
And President Yoon recently called for measures that are stronger than NATO's consultative group with the U.S. Now, what's the difference between the two groups then?
Well, the biggest difference is the deployment of nuclear assets. As for NATO, U.S.-owned nuclear weapons are stored in 5 member states, including Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Turkey. But under the NCG, nuclear assets will not be stationed in South Korean territory. Biden specifically underscored that Washington would not deploy nuclear weapons on the peninsula. Instead, as I mentioned earlier, U.S. nuclear-armed submarines will dock periodically in South Korea to deter North Korean threats. So there are some concerns that this may not be as effective as NATO's arrangement with the U.S. Some experts have assessed that Biden is committed to giving Seoul a central role in strategic planning as South Korea reaffirmed its commitment to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty by putting aside efforts to pursue its own nuclear arsenal. Another difference is that the NCG is a bilateral agreement between South Korea and the US, whereas NATO's NPG is a multilateral agreement. But under both agreements, the US has operational control of the nuclear weapons.
Now, moving on, also during Yoon's almost a week-long trip to the D.C., U.S. President Joe Biden mentioned the importance of trilateral cooperation with Japan. Let's talk about that.
Right, the Yoon administration has been working to restore ties with Japan in recent months. Biden thanked Yoon for his, quote, courageous diplomacy with Japan, saying it made an enormous difference that has strengthened their trilateral partnership. In a press conference, he said South Korea and the United States are working together through their trilateral cooperation with Japan to ensure the Indo-Pacific is free, open, and secure. And according to the Japanese news outlet, the Yomiuri Shimbun, the leaders of South Korea, US, and Japan will likely hold a summit on May 21st in Hiroshima on the sidelines of the G7 summit.
All right, let's see how the Washington Declaration and also the newly created NCG will be effective enough to deter potential threats from North Korea.
Right, and we also have the Trilateral Summit, which could take place next month.
All right, thank you so much for your wrap-up today, Inji.
My pleasure.
There were also mixed views on this Washington Declaration. Some foreign media outlets pointed out that South Korea has gained a lot, while others say it's not enough. Our Kim Mo-gyun has more.
Major news outlets in the U.S. say that the Washington Declaration and the establishment of the Nuclear Consultative Group will give more power to Seoul in Washington's use of nuclear weapons. The New York Times reports that President Joe Biden has given Seoul a central role for the first time in the strategic use of nuclear weapons in case of conflict with North Korea. CNN also said that the Biden administration deeply wanted to avoid deploying missiles on the Korean peninsula nor make Seoul develop its own nuclear weapons, and that this has led to the White House reassuring Seoul of its role. The Wall Street Journal, meanwhile, pointed at some limitations of the agreement. It says although the declaration could relieve Seoul's anxiety, it would not be enough in the long run, especially if North Korea continues to strengthen its military capabilities. The Japanese government responded to the news in a positive note, saying that joint efforts to expand Washington's deterrence will contribute to bringing peace and stability in the region, adding that Japan will also closely cooperate. Japan's Yomiuri Shimbun and Kyodo News said the outcome of the declaration reflects Washington's intention to show that Seoul doesn't need to become a nuclear state to protect itself. China didn't give an official response, but Beijing's English media mouthpiece Global Times warned ahead of the summit that Seoul's pro-American diplomatic policy will only bring big threats to the Korean peninsula. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang
Promoting economic security has long been the essence of Seoul-Washington cooperation. To endorse that commitment, Yoon and Biden sought mutually beneficial investment. That includes looking after Seoul's concerns over the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and the Chips and Science Act. Our Lee Dae-hyun tells us more.
South Korea deepens its technology partnership with the U.S. During the South Korea-U.S. summit, the two countries' top leaders made a joint statement where they pledged to establish a next-generation critical and emerging technologies dialogue led by their national security advisors. This dialogue will be held every year, with the first talks to come in the second half of this year.
The dialogue will help establish digital technology standards and regulation while closely cooperating in sectors such as AI, digital tech, biotech, open LAN, blockchain, and cybersecurity.
Following the statement, the presidential office said, as technology and national security have become inseparable, the significance of tech cooperation between the two countries is increasing. This dialogue is to expand public and private cooperation between Seoul and Washington on leading-edge semiconductors, batteries, and quantum technology. Top officials from the two countries also noted further cooperation on artificial intelligence, biotechnology, medical AI, and biomanufacturing. People-to-people exchange programs for young talents were also discussed. South Korea's Ministry of Education said the two countries have decided to invest in the Korea-U.S. Educational Exchange Initiative for Youth in STEM, which is short for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math, by injecting $30 million each into the program. They will shortlist over 2,000 young talents in science and technology who will take part in this initiative. Special exchange programs for university students studying science and engineering will also be rolled out. The ministry says it will work with its U.S. counterparts in order to successfully launch the program in 2024. Meanwhile, after the summit, the leaders of the two countries said they will continue to have close consultations to ensure the U.S. CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act encourage mutually beneficial corporate investment. When asked whether attempts to restrict China's expansion in chip production are having a heavy toll on South Korea, U.S. President Joe Biden responded that these acts are a win-win for both Seoul and Washington as they are helping economic growth in the U.S. while creating jobs in South Korea.
I don't think at least we don't, and I don't think so far, most of the South Korean companies believe that there's somehow a U.S. effort to slow them down, prevent their growth, or anything like that. We'd like to see them grow.
President Yoon Suk Yeol also welcomed more investment in batteries, chips, and EVs, adding that his counterpart would consider more U.S. investment in Korean businesses. 이다현, 아리랑뉴스.
The state visit was fruitful in that the South Korean leader secured total investment pledges from 8 American firms during his trip, amounting to $5.9 billion. In fact, Yoon kicked off his state visit with a $2.5 billion investment deal from Netflix. The American streaming service will pour that much money in over the next 4 years to produce K-content like movies, dramas, and reality shows. U.S. firms Air Products and Plug Power's investment in clean hydrogen is expected to play a major role in the transition to eco-friendly energy. Hopes are also high that investment in semiconductors will stabilize supply chains from chips to electric vehicles. The U.S. investment further stretches out to the carbon neutrality sector, which will help transform local energy and industrial structures. More investments are on the way in the field of advanced materials so that the development of high-tech industries is not left out. There was also a surprise meetup between President Yoon Suk Yeol and Tesla CEO Elon Musk upon Musk's request. During Wednesday's encounter, Yoon asked for investment for a Tesla production facility in South Korea, stressing that his country is an ideal location to run a gigafactory, given its advanced robotics and labor force. Musk responded that he expects to pay a visit to South Korea, saying the country remains a leading candidate for a gigafactory. Yoon further expressed hope for space cooperation between domestic businesses and Musk's spacecraft company, SpaceX. Staying with space, Seoul and Washington will go beyond traditional security and expand into cyberspace as well as outer space. The two allies have launched the Strategic Cybersecurity Cooperation Framework that is the first leader-level framework. Our Moon Hae-ryun tells us more.
In commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the alliance between South Korea and the United States, the two presidents discussed extending the alliance in cybersecurity and space exploration during the summit. In recognition of rising cybersecurity threats, the Strategic Cybersecurity Cooperation Framework has been established. It's an extension of the Mutual Defense Treaty in cyberspace, a bilateral defense agreement that establishes the commitment of the U.S. and South Korea to provide mutual defense support in case of an attack from a third party. The framework establishes the need to prioritize cybersecurity as a national policy and strategic priority through the sharing of information regarding cyber threats and building a civil-military academic partnership for cyber training, research, and development. Cybersecurity has been a key issue for South Korea in recent times with illegal cryptocurrency activities and cyber threats from North Korea. During his stay in the US, President Yoon also visited NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center with US Vice President Kamala Harris. With the third launch of the Korean space rocket Nuri carrying 8 satellites coming up next month, he was able to see how satellites are used by NASA to monitor climate change, further demonstrating the importance of developing space programs at home and collaboration with American aeronautics research. Harris also mentioned South Korea's lunar orbiter Danuri, which was launched last year on board a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Florida, as a stepping stone for further collaboration in space exploration.
With regard to this afternoon here at Goddard, we discussed our cooperation on the issue of space exploration. Notably, last year, South Korea placed a satellite in lunar orbit that carries a high-resolution camera from NASA and will continue to work to search for water on the moon. South Korea will soon fly payloads through NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. I like to think of it as our version of a rideshare program for space exploration.
NASA's Deputy Administrator and South Korea's Minister of Science and ICT signed a joint statement of intent to further cooperate in science and exploration. In addition to expanding the alliance to space exploration, Yoon and Biden agreed to work on space security collaboration, as well as clarifying the recent policy that eased U.S. export restrictions for satellites, a move that greatly benefits South Korea's space launch industry. 문혜련, 아리랑뉴스.
Beefing up their cyberspace alliance is also part of efforts by the two countries to counter North Korea's growing threats in cyberspace, like cutting off the regime's source of funding for the regime's weapons programs through illegal cyber activities. So on Monday this week, Seoul and Washington, for the first time ever, simultaneously slapped independent sanctions on the same target in the cyberspace. That is an individual from North Korea, Shim Hyun-sup, who is affiliated with North Korea's Kwangson Banking Corporation. It's an organization that was subject to sanctions by the UN Security Council in 2016. Shim is accused of creating anonymous accounts and money laundering to procure funds for North Korea's nuclear and missile development. Now, Monday's sanction marked the 6th round of sanctions against Pyongyang under the Yoon administration. Also, during his trip to D.C., President Yoon Suk Yeol addressed a joint session of Congress, becoming the first Korean leader to do so in nearly a decade. Our top office correspondent, Oh Soo-young, fills us in.
Inspired by freedom, liberal democracy and human rights, South Korea and the United States will put their alliance in action as a compass for freedom in the world. That was the core of President Yoon Suk Yeol's speech to a joint session of the US Congress on Thursday. Reflecting on the past 70 years of bilateral security ties, Yoon described how South Korea, by joining hands with the US, had grown from the ashes of the Korean War to become the world's 10th largest economy, based on liberal democracy and a free market system.
For over 70 years in the history of the alliance, we worked together in military and security sectors. We also expanded our cooperation in the economic field. Our relationship has evolved from one of unilateral assistance to a partnership that is mutually beneficial.
He noted that Korean companies are now contributing to the US economy, producing EV batteries, semiconductors and cars, and creating thousands of well-paid jobs. Going forward, he said the two countries will lead in innovation beyond security and foreign policy to work on cutting-edge technologies, including chips, artificial intelligence, bioscience and quantum technology. But beyond economic relations, Yoon presented how the alliance would jointly tackle challenges to the freedom and rights of citizens around the world. He highlighted human rights abuses in North Korea, describing what he called unspeakable and horrendous incidents where men and women were killed for violating COVID-19 measures, publicly executed for watching South Korean shows, and being shot in public for their religious faith. Yoon also condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
It is an attempt to unilaterally change the status quo with force. Korea strongly condemns the unprovoked armed attack against Ukraine.
Saying freedom and democracy are again under threat, Yoon said South Korea will rise to defend global citizens based on its own history of being invaded by North Korea and living up to its current economic capacity. He also thanked the members of Congress for unanimously adopting a resolution that welcomed his state visit. The document stressed the importance of the bilateral alliance for peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and across the Indo-Pacific region.
Receiving 23 standing ovations, President Yoon's speech marks the first time in 10 years that a South Korean leader has addressed the US Congress, the heart and soul of US democracy. Based on their shared universal values, he said the alliance will march towards the future for the freedom of humanity. 오수영, 아리랑뉴스, Washington D.C.
That is all we have for this week's weekly news highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.